Earlier, before we started recording, there were multiple reports that Joel Embiid's return is imminent. He is scheduled to play against OKC at home tomorrow. He's been out since having meniscus surgery in early February. He traveled with the team this weekend, little team chemistry and camaraderie. He was in Cleveland and then Toronto. How big a deal is this, gang?
Huge. Ash, I know you're more skeptical than I am on the health thing, and it's a really good point. I'll just say this. I think that if he's healthy, if he should be out there, that's a big if. I love it, John. I mean, your Sixers team looked like and had the resume and the performance of a contender when he got hurt in January. And if he can get on the right side, the non-Celtic side of the Eastern Conference bracket, Ash, I don't know. I think somebody's got to make it to the conference finals. I think magic is possible for this team.
I just feel like that's a big if, and I don't know if I'm willing to gamble that if with a player who has chronically been plagued with injury his entire career, and those injuries have come at the worst possible time, and there's been a direct domino effect to how it affects what this team is able to accomplish. Look, I'm not going to say that the 76ers are not better without Joel Embiid, and that when he gets on the floor, whether he's 80%, 70%, 90%, that they're going to look better. But I just wonder, at what cost do you make that risk when this is not a team? John says it all the time. This is the Celtics. It's the Celtics, and then there's everybody else, right? So in a realistic vacuum, what are the chances for the 76ers to make to the Eastern Conference Finals? What is the chances for the 76ers to make it out of the East? And if those are very slim chances, then why do you risk the health of a player who's probably not 100% when you can start fresh with him next season? And for the first time in possibly his entire career, you have a healthy Joel Embiid to start your season. I don't know if I'm taking the risk. That's just me.
20 to 30%, John, if you win the 7-8 game. If you are playing the Bucks in the first round of the actual playoffs and you avoid, obviously, the Boston Celtics, you got to go through the Heat and then Milwaukee.
You gotta beat the Heat in the play-in game, and then all of a sudden you get Milwaukee, which sounds kind of nice because if you don't, then you end up with the Celtics in the first round, and that's going to be a bummer. To Ashley's point, it looks like it's pretty baked here. They only have 7 games left, including tomorrow's game against Oklahoma City, right? So they're a game and a half behind the Heat for 7th, and they're 2 games behind the Pacers for 8th. So unless something like really unusual happens here, they're going to be in that 7-8 play-in game. You got to get past the Heat, and then all of a sudden, who knows? And I did ask around. I still know a bunch of people in and around the organization, and like the idea of what's happening here isn't surprising. Number one, Joel Embiid wants to play. He missed 2 seasons to start his career, and it's tough to I'm with you, Ash, that like you don't want to risk further injury, and like what are the chances of them actually doing something significant and meaningful in the playoffs? Probably not that much, but the guy wants to play, and it's hard to tell him no. And then on top of that, they look at the rest of the Eastern Conference and they go, why not us? I mean, it's the Celtics, and then it is everybody else. So to that extent, I get it because they were really good with him. So if he is healthy, this could maybe be something.
I'm definitely not saying that they're not better with him. I just don't know. I mean, let's be realistic. Just because you're able to play or you're cleared to play rather doesn't mean you're 100%. He probably is coming back before he's 100% ready. So I just use that as my gauge. When you already have a player who chronically gets injured, not being 100% is a big deal, especially when you're talking about the focus of your team, the nucleus of your team, which is what Joel Embiid is. And I just don't know if Eastern Conference is not a realistic goal, if coming out of the East is not a realistic goal because of what the Eastern Conference looks like right now, and you've already missed so much time. I don't understand necessarily what the rush is when you know he's coming back next season. Now, granted, he's not 25 years old, but isn't that even more of a reason why you have a 30-plus-year-old player? You want him as healthy as he can be for an entire season to see what this team can look like. They looked good when he was on the floor. The 76ers looked good post James Harden. I don't know. I don't know if I take the gamble. That's just me. Again,
I think your points are the reason I go for it if he's healthy enough. You have to take every opportunity you can with Joel Embiid. There will never be a moment for me where he will step on the floor and I won't hold my breath when some sort of high-impact play happens. Like, you're always going to be worried about Embiid's injuries. And I think that it's easy to forget that when he was on the floor for the first 46 games of the year, he missed a quarter of those games, by the way. So through January, This was a championship level team. This wasn't no disrespect, or maybe disrespect to these teams. This wasn't the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Knicks before OG got traded to them and got hurt, or for me, the Timberwolves. I know not for John. It wasn't one of these second-tier teams you had to sort of close your eyes and maybe imagine they could win the whole thing. This was a team at that point that was in the top 10 offensive rating, top 10 in defensive rating, which we've talked about as an important stat, 4th in net rating over the time before he got hurt. John, that's why I think you go for it if it's not too much of a risk, because this was the second best team clearly in the Eastern Conference and one of the 4 or 5 teams that I think was very reasonable to say they can win the whole thing. And it's a harder path now because of the games they've lost and the fact they've fallen to that first play-in. But if you can win that play-in game, there is a world, I think, where Philly is real. The Heat did it last year. It is not an impossibility, and this team is really good when Embiid's on the floor.
The Heat were the only second. The Heat were the second team in NBA history to do it. It's not a high possibility.
Well, the play-in hasn't been around for 20 years, right? I mean, the play-in has not been around for very long.
The Heat being an 8th seed and going to the finals has only happened once before then. That means it's not a high possibility.
But out of how many times?
Which proves my point.
The play-in hasn't been happening for that long. The play-in's relatively new.
No.
So, I mean,
what I'm saying is that an 8th seed advancing
but it can happen.
The finals has not happened. It only happened once before Miami, which means whether you put the play in or not, it's not a high possibility for a seed that low to advance all the way. It just hardly ever happens.
I think this is an exception, Ash, if Embiid's healthy. I mean, I think they're a championship level team, John, at the 8th seed.
Well, I mean, let's not just lock them into the 8 automatically. They're going to be in the 8 going into the play-in, but if they can beat the Heat in that first game, then all of a sudden you get the Bucks. Now you're the 7, and it's like, maybe. They were 26-8 with Joel Embiid before he went down. And to Bill's point, they were a top 10 offensive and defensive rated team, which is not nothing. It's actually quite something. So they looked really good. Now it depends on what kind of Embiid you're getting back. And I just want to mention this before we move on. Joel Embiid has been injured a lot. He's 30 years old. Interestingly, he has 3 years left on his contract, which makes him extension eligible this offseason. And I was looking at the numbers. They could give him, Joel Embiid, a 2-year extension this offseason, which would kick in 2027. The 2-year extension would be worth $129 million, which if you do the math, and I did, the average there is $64.5 million. At 30 years old, the most games he's ever played in his entire career, 68 games. That's the high water mark. Are you giving 30-year-old Joel Embiid, often injured, missed the first 2 years of his career, just came off another meniscus surgery, $64.5 million extension times 2 years this offseason? He is the franchise.
Yeah, they are giving it to him. Yes.
I mean,
I'm not.
You're asking would I, or if I am the 76ers?
Well, none of us have the money, so I'm asking if the Sixers should.
They should not, and they will.
Yeah, they should and they will. Now, would I do it? I don't know if I would be as willing to open my wallet because of the reason that you mentioned. He's 30 years old. He's chronically injured. But the 76ers don't really have another option, although they are a well-orchestrated team or constructed team, rather. Joel Embiid is very much the top of the pyramid, and you lose him, everything else doesn't matter. So you don't have a choice in the matter.
Yeah, I mean, if he'll sign it, they should absolutely offer it to him and make him sign it because of course they want to keep him around for as long as they possibly can.